From the land to Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 5th day of May, 2026. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk about the commodity markets with Naomi Blohm at TotalFarmMarketing.com. And we'll hear an interview that I did last week with a member of Google's Data Center and Infrastructure and Energy team. You want to be sure to hear that right here on this Tuesday edition of the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media. It is public radio for the farming world.
Todd Gleason's services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
Naomi Blohm from TotalFarmMarketing.com out of West Bend, Wisconsin, now joins us to take a look at the marketplace. Hi, Naomi. Thanks much for being with us. I want to look back at the trade, not for today, but from yesterday, because there were some really good numbers that came out yesterday. We had a turnaround Tuesday today, but what was the importance of yesterday?
Yeah, December corn was the hot subject. These 26 contract traded to a fresh 2.5-year high yesterday, and closing above $5 was very significant from a technical perspective. So the traders today were very curious, could it be another close above $5 today or not? A little bit of, like you said, turnaround Tuesday. But a 2.5-year high, $5 corn, we never thought we'd get here months ago, and here we are. So on the December corn, we did see a lot of cash sales today. For old crop and new crop, we saw a lot of hedging take place today just because of the $5 handle. If by chance it can work a little bit higher, the next target would be about 512.5, and then it would be 5.25. But we got to keep in mind we need some legit, fresh, bullish news to make that happen. The funds are getting pretty long in the marketplace, close probably now to about 300,000 contracts long. And we're also just in that seasonal time frame where between Mother's Day and Father's Day, there's a lot of times when we find our spring, summer high. So I think that's why you saw the turnaround Tuesday like we did today, because people just recognizing the value of $5 corn and on those November beans yesterday, all the way up to the $12 price point. And that was significant resistance. So $12.50 was a high yesterday. That was the top of an uptrend line that had been established since August. And then also, if you look at a daily chart, the swing objective was met. So if you take the high from last November to the low from January, and then resistance from February, you take that 70-cent price difference and add it to the breakout of 11.30. That's why we got to $12 yesterday. So it was major resistance in two different components. So the turnaround Tuesday today made some sense on some profit taking.
I bet, given what you've told me about corn, that you're saying, you know what, probably better put the order in just in case it gets filled overnight at this time, so that you make sure you've got some new crop sale done or something done there. And if that's your worst sale, good for you. If not, at least you've got started.
Right.
Don't cancel as close this time around, right?
Yes, exactly. Such tremendous value. And next week, though, it's going to be a big week next week. So we've got a USDA report Tuesday, and they're going to have the new crop data on it, and usually it's not bullish. And then we've got maybe some decisions on E15, and then we've got President Trump and President Xi probably getting together next week. So we could see major volatility next week, could be higher or lower, just depending on what news transpires out of all of those events. But again, you've got some pretty amazing value in front of you, so don't ignore it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the crop progress plays into next week's WASDE. They don't often change acreage, but when things are moving as quickly as they have, particularly for corn planting, soybeans too, this year, east of the Mississippi River primarily, sometimes USDA surprises folks and doesn't use what they released at the Ag Forum. So I wonder if you've thought about acreage changes and what they might do.
I guess I've thought about it, but I'm a little skeptical that the USDA will do anything right now. I'm curious if they would. It would be a big surprise if they did, but usually they kind of stick with that March 31st number, and then they give us a huge yield number. But the question will be what they do with demand there. And, with the crop planting as good as it's going, corn is 38% planted, kind of same as a year ago, beans 33% ahead of a year ago. And I know this week there's a lot getting done. So we're going to have a big planted number next week, Monday. So, without any dramatic weather news, or it would have to be a major war escalation, it might be hard for the grain markets to get much traction, again, unless, to your point, something of a bullish surprise occurs on that report next week.
How are farmers in Wisconsin doing? They have been behind because it's been so very wet.
Yes, but I have an answer for your question, because I went down to Platteville this weekend to see Oscar at his spring football scrimmage, and down by Platteville, they are planting pretty very well, and I saw a lot of fields that were already planted. But then when you get by Madison, there was not a lot of field work getting done, but I do know over the past couple of days there's been a lot more done, and where I live on the northeastern side of the state, I have literally heard I'm mudding it in multiple times in conversations today. So guys are trying to get something done. But we are just so chilly up here and still trying to dry out from all that rain we had a couple weeks ago. But I think we are starting to see some progress.
Hey, thank you much, Naomi. Naomi Blohm, of course, is with TotalFarmMarketing.com. Up next, we'll hear a series of excerpts from an interview I did with Liz Schwab. She's with Google's data center team and an energy and infrastructure manager. I started by asking her why it was that Google had contacted me and had a data center push on with local media.
Yeah, data centers are in the news, right? And a lot of the concerns and misconceptions and even excitement comes from just a lack of understanding and awareness of what data centers do, what they power, and importantly, how they operate. And it's really understandable that the average layperson who's very busy with their day-to-day life doesn't have the time to read up on how data centers operate and the economic development process. And so you see some of the reports out there or stories online, and it, of course, drives concerns. And so that's part of why, I really appreciate the time with you today, is to get our message out there, talk to the American public more about what data centers do and how they can be developed responsibly so that we can continue to power the digital and cloud services we all rely on, while also protecting our natural resources, supporting the grid, and doing it all responsibly.
I have been to protest and to county meetings both on this topic in the last week and a half to 2 weeks. Those who are at these protests and the meetings both do ask the question, what exactly does a data center do? So, in short, what is it that's housed there? What does it do?
Yeah, a data center basically houses thousands of high-tech computers called servers that power digital services and the internet and the cloud as we know it. So, when you're looking up directions to avoid a traffic jam on the way to work, or you're storing your family's photos, you're streaming your favorite service, or, you have a small or large business and you're operating in the cloud, all of those things depend on data centers.
Why is it that we need hyperscale-sized data centers, and why is there a push for so many of them across the nation? I can think of just 3 in the state of Illinois that are proposed at this time.
Yeah. So I think it helps to take a step back. And I think you and I are probably old enough to remember when we all had servers underneath our desks, right, that had a little fan in them to keep them cool. And we've steadily moved more and more away to having sort of on-site or on-prem computing. And the benefit of that, when we go to a hyperscale data center campus, is that we enjoy so many efficiencies in the energy use, in the computing, in the amount of processing we get out of every chip and every server is drastically improved. And that allows us to do more with limited amounts of energy. And that's really the benefit of hyperscale campuses.
Limited amount of energy. However, these are generally sited next to a substation because they use so very much energy. And those locally are fearful that it will drive electrical rates higher. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Is there factual evidence one way or the other that Google has as it's related to electrical rates?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of factual evidence that large energy users like data centers can put downward pressure on rates and actually lower rates. And it's understandable why there's a misconception out there. Before working on data centers, I could not tell you the first thing about the electricity system, the regional transmission organizations, FERC, how utilities work, right? It's a really complex system. And when you get a new large load user like a data center, what we basically do is distribute those fixed costs over a broader denominator. So it's almost like inviting a wealthy roommate into your house who's willing to fund a new roof and upgrade the electrical and put new windows in. A large energy user brings a much broader use base to the system and can help actually modernize the grid for everyone else. So states that have an increase in load growth have actually seen a flattening of their average residential utility rates. There's a great study from the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs from last year that shows that. And of course, every state's a little different in terms of how their electricity system is regulated and structured. But our commitment is to, of course, always pay for the electricity and the infrastructure that we use and more, right? We go further to make sure we're investing in that shared system.
How should county boards go about making sure that those who are building data centers, and Google may be an investor, may very well not be the builder, are paying for the infrastructure upgrades?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's generally done at the utility and PUC level for the energy portion. But of course, there's a lot of other infrastructure, right? Like roads or water, other infrastructure that we are also committed to paying for. And so those are the right questions to be asking. No municipality, city, county should be bearing the bill for a new data center. In fact, it's the opposite, right? So if our project needs to widen a road or fund other infrastructure, that should be done in a way that benefits the broader community and actually allows that municipality to fund something that maybe otherwise they would have had to wait a long time for or pass a special bond for. But for the presence of a company like Google, we can come in and fund that as part of a larger project.
Tell me about water usage of data centers, both closed-looped and not closed-looped water usage.
Yeah, so water use, I think helpful to take a step back here. The reason why companies like Google even pursue water cooling in the first place is because it actually helps you lower your electricity use. So it's a bit of a trade-off in terms of resource use. And it's always a locally driven decision. So when Google looks at a new site and what the right cooling design should be, one of the first things we start with is the watershed health of that site. Right, so we work with local, state, federal officials, data sets, hydrologist experts, et cetera, to study that watershed. If it's healthy, both from a volumetric and quality perspective, we can then take that next step to talk with a water utility and see if the water infrastructure is adequate. Of course, throughout all of that, we are transparent. We report our annual water usage, and we commit to replenishing 120% of the water that we use. So where we do pursue water cooling, we aim to leave the system better than when we found it.
Do you make the initial assessments that are done by outside sources available to the residents of the area prior to the time that these are approved?
Yeah, we work really closely with local officials to determine what those cooling decisions will be. We're always happy to share those assessments. It's generally done with local experts to begin with that sometimes they know and work closely with already. So we're always happy to share those assessments. And then, of course, the local water utility is also often mandated to, but we work with them as well to share what impact, if any, our project might have on the system. And again, generally, it's Google being able to fund some upgrade or backup or duplication of the system in terms of additional infrastructure investments.
Many are concerned about water contamination as well. Can you give me some information about that related to data centers?
Yeah, so I think this is another misconception that data centers are somehow dirtying water and spitting it back out somewhere. When we use water for cooling, it goes through, sometimes it will go direct to the chip, to the computer chip, to the servers, but it will go through a pretty rigorous process to be cleaned, treated, brought to the right temperature before it's ever sent back out to the local municipal water authority. And of course, there are stringent regulations at all levels to ensure that that's done in a responsible way. And of course, we adhere to those and generally try to surpass any of those regulations. But really, it's some minerals or metallic load that water could potentially pick up if you're doing direct cooling like that. And then there's ways to treat that water, ensure it's returned cleaner than when we got it. Now, of course, that's from like a freshwater perspective. Wherever we can, we like to use other forms of water, whether that's reclaimed or wastewater. And in those cases, we're returning it much cleaner than when we first got it. But that's both an economical and an environmentally friendly way to go where we have access to that.
One of the other concerns many residents have is sound, particularly from the generators. How loud are these when they're at maximum volume, and for how long?
Yeah, so I think there's two different sort of types of sound that you can think about with a data center. So if there's a grid outage, that's really the only time that a data center will be running backup generators. So just like a hospital or a police station or other critical services, data centers will have backup generation to ensure that basically the computers don't melt, right? That life-saving, equipment, lights, communications, et cetera, are all on board. So those, if they're running, will be louder than your average operational day. Right. I can picture, I live in the Northeast, when we have a blizzard or a power outage and our neighbors, generators kick on, it's like, oh, power went out, right? You can hear them. That is a really rare occurrence, happens maybe a couple hours a year, depending on grid outages, right? During regular operations, the cooling equipment is actually fairly quiet. So it depends on local zoning, local noise ordinances, which we of course adhere to. But a sort of average across most US localities is a nighttime average of like 55 to 60 decibels for light industrial facilities, or sometimes during the day, local zoning will say 60 to 65. That's about the sound of a dishwasher. So if you were standing at the property line, it would sound like a dishwasher in your kitchen. And of course, most people don't live, at the fence line of a data center. So they're actually a really quiet and unobtrusive industrial neighbor compared to a lot of other uses.
Two final questions for you, and then maybe something else. One is, are there setbacks that Google thinks about that are good neighbors? So is it a mile, a half mile, something like that around these data centers?
It really depends. And I know that's an unsatisfying answer, but if you think of all the variation in types of sites around the country or just around the state of Illinois, right? You could be adjacent to a highway. Probably don't need much of a setback from a highway, right? That's going to be a loud, neighbor during most of the day, or an airport, another example, right? But then you think about a residential subdivision, and of course, you need some significant setbacks. Perhaps more importantly, you need, berms and shrubbery, and you want to design the site in a certain way so the cooling equipment is shielded with a building, or, there's all different types of creative ways that we can explore to make sure that the data center is designed in a way that's not bothering neighbors. And that's part of the process that we go through with local officials during zoning and approvals.
There is concern on the data centers being located, for instance, inside the MISO, which is the Midwest area electrical grid, that there will be so many of them that it creates enough strain on the system that it may cause it may be detrimental to it. Has Google thought about this, and how do you ameliorate that kind of issue?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, our sites being up and running and reliable is of the utmost importance to us, right? It's important to our customers, both our individual users, as well as our enterprise customers, public sector, government customers. So we care about this issue a lot, both because we depend on it. Our employees live in these communities, right? And it's a business interest as well, frankly, right? So all of the incentives are aligned in the right place here, and we put our money where our mouth is. So we bring on significant new energy generation, and we fund upgrades to the grid wherever we operate to make sure that our presence is adding to grid resilience. I think the other thing for your listeners to understand is that there are, robust regulatory processes in place. Utilities and regulators at the PUC, the state, the regional MISO, as well as the federal level, are all in place to help protect grid reliability. Grid reliability really is the number one job of all of those regulators, and we rely on their expertise and deep partnership just as well.
Does Google actually build data centers? I mean, or are you just an investor in companies that build data centers? And I ask that because there is a difference in the answer to your question. If, well, we do this, but the people that actually are providing data centers, we don't understand how many of them are out there or what it's doing to the grid.
Yeah, I mean, most of the industry does a little bit of both. And there's actually a third category where we lease space in someone else's data center, right? So whenever we can, it's usually most cost efficient for us to build our own data centers. So we prefer that. And we can control more of the process. But there are also opportunities that might come to us from a developer where we might work with a third party to build the data center, and then we buy it or lease it. Right. So it will still look and feel like a Google data center at the end of the day. It's still our name on the sign outside, but perhaps another company built it. And then that third category is sort of a subset of the industry called co-location or third-party data center service providers, where you will have a data center operator lease out space within the facility, where you might have, multiple companies, dozens of companies leasing out certain parts, certain amounts of capacity, computing capacity in that data center.
Anything I didn't ask you, Liz, that I should have?
No, I don't think so. We covered a lot. Thank you for bringing me on.
You're welcome. That's Liz Schwab. She is an infrastructure and energy manager for Google's data center team. They reached out to me to do this interview. Let's check the weather forecast for the Corn Belt today. We're joined by Don Day. He's at Day Weather in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Don, I say for the Corn Belt, but I'd like to begin where you are because apparently it's snowing there today.
Yeah, we're looking at an Intermountain West and Western High Plains early May snowstorm, which now for a lot of folks will sound, oh, that sounds awful, but it's going to bring tremendous help to some really dry areas, eastern Colorado and western Kansas wheat country, and far southern and southwest Nebraska as well. Going to get some very, very beneficial moisture out of this that they could really, really need. So there is certainly concerns, especially tomorrow night is some freezing temperatures. But usually when you get a wet snow like this, that wetness can help lessen that impact a little bit. So yes, it's snowing, but there's more smiles than frowns.
What water equivalent do you think you'll have by the time it's finished up?
There will be many areas that have more than an inch of water, and some mountain locations 2 to 3 inches worth of water. So for that part of the country, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, that was my next question, because an inch of rainfall here is fantastic and fairly normal. An inch of water there in one fell swoop has to be a lot.
It is, and something that you really hope happens in spring.
Okay, so let's move out of there. Let's begin in Nebraska. I think there's still really dry parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Tell me about those areas.
Yeah, I tell you, Nebraska in particular, that's been one area that has had the worst luck, I think, of any state in the lower 48 in terms of getting precipitation. And this most recent storm is a good example of that. Extreme southwest and southern Nebraska is getting precipitation, but the rest of the state isn't. And as we get on into the end of the week and into the weekend and early next week, there's going to be a little bit of shower and thunderstorm activity and a little bit of help, but that slow-moving big spring storm has just eluded most of Nebraska and some portions of that northwest corn belt, and that's going to continue. The bias of the better precipitation chances will be in the central and southern areas.
It will be a problem for the Ogallala. It will be a problem for the Ogallala Aquifer, for the Colorado River. How much of a problem do you think for that service area?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is that the South Platte and North Platte rivers that come together in southwest Nebraska there and help with that whole aquifer situation, they're not only dealing with a very dry winter, but a very low snowpack. So this spring moisture that's coming is really, really critical. But there's areas of central and western Nebraska that are continuing to see drought conditions worsen into spring, which is the exact opposite of what you want to see.
Across the state line into western Iowa, are they suffering as well?
Yeah, well, that's certainly been drier. That's kind of been an extension of Nebraska. Now, you get into eastern and southern Iowa, it's a little bit of a different story. But eastern Nebraska, western Iowa, over the next 7 days, not seeing much.
And in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio.
Well, those central and southern counties of both of those states, 3 states, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio, are going to be right along a frontal boundary that's going to bring some coolness, but an active area of showers and thunderstorms. This is going to be especially true here as we get into the short term. But also as we get into the end of the week, there's going to be some more cool air coming in. But we see the most consistent moisture in those states in the southern counties.
You keep talking about cool air in the Great Lakes area, the northern part of the Corn Belt. Does that cause an issue? Will we get cold enough for there to be freezes and frosts?
I don't think so. If we do see temperatures approaching those values, it'll be up in northern Wisconsin, northern areas of Minnesota, northern Michigan. But we're certainly looking at the next week ahead, temperatures are going to be below average. I tell you, we have a very impressive deep area of low pressure over Hudson Bay that continues to pump cool Canadian air into the central and eastern United States. And for another week, that'll be the trend.
Hey, thank you much. We'll talk with you again next week.
Sounds good.
That's Don Day. He is with Day Weather in Cheyenne, Wyoming. You've been listening to the Closing Market Report on this Tuesday afternoon. You can find it online right now if you'd like to listen to again at WILLAG.org. I'm Todd Gleason.